I got a bunch of dwarves. It's not a large amount of dwarves, it's kind of a small amount, but it is the Longbeards and the Ironbreakers and some Hammerers from my favorite edition, which happens to be the 6th edition. And I only got a small amount of them because they are kind of expensive to get these days. I really hope that they will be a part of the pre-order or the made-to-order when the dwarves are released, but that is just a hope. I have no idea if they actually will do that. But until then, I can only play them as skirmish games, so they will be painted up for Imborg. But while doing that, I realized something. These guys, they're cast in metal, and they have a scheme that is pretty much metal. Why don't we just leave them to be metal? And, instead of using a color, paint them black and then paint them metal using a color that is like really nice because it contains a lot of metal, so it really looks like metal. Why don't just let them be? Or does people know something that I don't? Let's find out. I've got 10 dwarves to paint. Split over 2, or perhaps even 3 tracks to compare the results. It might not be a peer-reviewed science article, but hey, I'm painting tiny toy dwarves. But if you do like it, please give it a thumbs up, as it is my main source of evaluation. First up, I've got some Hammerers, primed pure white. Some 20 odd years ago I also painted their faces in what I believe to be that classical dwarf bronze dwarf skin, bronze flesh. I'm pretty certain it was something with bronze and dwarf. Anyway, it should be drying by now, and I'll just let it be. Then we have 3 Longbeards, 2 Ironbreakers, and 1, odd cannon crew. And they are left as is. Finally, we have 1 fellow primed in a common, spray can zenithal. If I'm not mistaken, this is Mr. Bugman himself. Anyway, as I'm not using any contrast paints or similar, I don't expect the zenithal to make much of a difference. Therefore, I pretty much consider it to be 2 tracks. Primed and bare metal. I should probably have done 1 gang that got a black primer and drybrush as well. But I didn't do that. The next step is priming the metal ones. But only the parts that will be something other than metal. It is done using a hand primer. On some, most notably the Ironbreakers, this only takes a few seconds, but on others, like the Longbeards, it's not as fast. Then it's time to turn things around. The ones that have been primed get a coat of white metal, wherever things will be metal. I often paint all metal silver to begin with, even if it will be gold or something other later. It might be a few extra minutes to begin with, but it decreases the risk of missing something completely. It is better to have some bit of something that was meant to be copper in a general metal color. Then we have unified their current state, and from now on, they can all follow the same steps. I must admit that looking at them now, they are surprisingly alike. I went on to paint all copper and gold in their respective colors. I wanted that metal you can see in the 7th edition Dwarf Army book to give some contrast in there. It's probably meant to be bronze. Unfortunately, the Vallejo air metal range does not contain any bronze, so I mixed it up myself using gold and copper. Not a big deal. I only have 3 metal colors, and I find that they cover all my needs. The next step was an oil wash. I tend to use a mix of black and paint grey rather than pure black. It brings a bit of cold tone in there, and especially over white metal this is preferable. It might sound annoying to start with the oil wash as it takes a while to dry. The thing is that I will be using oil colors, and then it's good to have a thin layer to start with. Even after removing the excess, all but the most extreme sticky outer bits will have a tiny layer of medium to mix into. If you use acrylic paints, just put the oil wash last, as your standard recipe would prescribe, Then there is the actual painting. Once again, the beards are done in a ridiculously short time. I used a slightly diluted oil paint, as I did in the troll video, and it acts as a contrast paint that you can modify until you're happy. The skin in the Longbeard faces are a bit tricky, as they are in quite a recess. But, you know, with oil paints that's not a problem. Just concentrate on the actual area and wipe any mistakes later. And speaking of relaxed effects, I've found a new favorite way of doing eyes. I just don't paint them. At least on tiny miniatures, like these. Instead I just follow the Rolling Stones and paint it black. It is very unlikely that someone will notice. The eyes are in a natural cavity, just use that fact. The beards of the Longbeards, they could pretty much be, you know, the white primer and then the oil wash. But as they are the main feature of these guys, I thought I would put a bit more effort in there. And I'm not dry brushing them, but I don't know what you call this method for edge highlights. You use any sort of longer brush and load it up in a manner similar to a dry brush. Then you drag the brush perpendicular to the miniature and use the middle of the brush rather than tip. People go on about how thinning your paints is the first and most important thing to learn. I do not agree. It's brush control. Just look at this. Brush control is king. And just to be clear, this has nothing to do with oil, acrylic or whatever base of color you use. I just like to paint with oils. You could do the same thing with any medium. Looking at the final results, I would argue that it's kind of hard to distinguish between the two methods. The regular acrylic metals and, you know, whatever I did. My first thought was to call it extreme metallic metal, because it sounds way more cool than it is. But I googled that and it's kind of already taken. So I thought, you know, let's go with bare metallic metal. Because that's what it is. It's metal that is left to be bare. So to answer the original question, why doesn't anyone do this? Or do you? Please let me know in the comments then. But at least my conclusion is that, yeah, bare metallic metals really can be useful. But first, let's have a look at the results. Ironbreakers. If you paint metal Ironbreakers, bare metallic metal is probably the way fastest method of getting them done. It is quite literally prime and paint the beard and parts of the shaft. Use oils, contrast, layer paints, or, you know, permanent marker. It's a matter of minutes. The best part is the blade of the axe that I filed a bit as a final touch. Just, you know, look at it. Yeah, there's no reason to do other than bare metallic metals here. Next up we have the Longbeards. Here you don't gain as much in speed. They have much more of a mixture of things going on, and that requires a lot of painting, even if the metal is already done. The only thing I wonder about is, you know, these are second-hand miniatures that have been around for at least a decade and through at least one paint job. How would it look if they were instead pristine cast metal? I really hope that the metal dwarfs from the 6th edition reappear at some point in the old world. The Hammerers. I don't think bare metallic metals is the fastest way here. A great metallic like Vallejo Air Silver on the plain white primer looks pretty much the same. And given that they have so much non-metallic, it is probably easier just to spray them. You don't have to wait 20 years for the paint to dry. 20 minutes should be just fine. Mr. Bugman, I believe it is. He might be in for a bit of a downgrade, as I intend to use him as a regular treasure hunter dwarf in Imborg. I do love the sculpt, and you know, he really looks like someone who would be up for the task of entering a derelict city in search of loot. There's pretty much no trace of the zenithal, but that's not surprising. I did not paint with anything like contrast paint, so you could say it was kind of a waste. But it took me a few extra seconds and it gave me a well-defined canvas to paint on. Oh, and it made no difference whatsoever when it came to the metal. But, you know, he looks great anyway. Finally, we have the Bombardier. Total waste of time using bare metallic metals. Not that the paint on primer is hard, but you know, the only 2 metal features, it would have been way easier just to spray him or flat, zenithal, or whatever you fancy, and just, you know, paint the metal. The little mortar I built him is quite obviously not cast in metal, but built out of matchsticks and green stuff, so there I had no real choice. In the end, will bare metallic metals revolutionize the miniature painting community? No, I'm pretty certain it won't. I mean, first off, you do need an actual metal miniature to begin with, and even with the, you know, re-releases from the old world, they will still be in minority. But it's kind of undeniable that painting one of these old metal Ironbreakers in this way, that's quite an effective way of doing things. You pretty much paint the beard and you're done. But it's not all about effect either. I mean, at least I enjoy to, you know, vary my hobby a bit, try different things. And I think that's more important actually. That's the point of this whole thing, you know. You probably guessed it, but don't forget to enjoy your hobby.